The cleaner answered a call in Chinese in front of the Millionaire. The next day Catherine Parker was quietly cleaning the glass office while Richard Anderson shouted into the phone at his advisors. The company was facing an unprecedented crisis, and the businessman's nerves were visible to anyone who entered that luxurious floor in the financial heart of New York City. That's when the international line rang. Richard was too busy with his other call to answer, and on automatic impulse, Catherine picked up the phone. Hearing the voice on the other end, she responded in flawless Chinese, her tone transforming completely as she gestured with ease. Richard's jaw dropped, completely forgetting the call in his own hand. He never imagined that this 60-year-old woman who had gone unnoticed in the halls of Anderson Enterprises for 2 years in her blue uniform could hold such a secret. "Shekshie wo hui juan gao ta, Zaijian," Catherine said before hanging up, realizing too late Richard's stunned expression. How did you—" he stammered, still holding his own phone, the call forgotten. "Forgive me, sir, it was automatic." Catherine lowered her head, placing the phone back on the hook and quickly returning to her cleaning cart. "Wait, what did they say? Who was it?" Richard recovered from his shock, ending his own call without even saying goodbye. "It was Mr. Yang Liu from the Chinese delegation. He said he'll arrive tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the meeting, not at 2 p.m. as scheduled," she replied simply, as if translating Mandarin calls were part of her daily duties. Richard stared at the cleaner with a mix of confusion and curiosity. He had a crucial meeting with Chinese investors the next day, a negotiation that could save his company from imminent bankruptcy. For weeks, he'd been trying to hire a reliable interpreter, but the last one had backed out at the last minute. "Ma'ams, what was your name again?" he asked, realizing he'd never truly paid attention to her. "Catherine, sir, Catherine Parker." "Mrs. Parker, where did you learn to speak Chinese like that?" A brief flicker of pride passed through the cleaner's eyes, quickly replaced by the submissive expression Richard was used to seeing. "That was a long time ago, sir." "Another life," she replied, returning to wiping the conference table. Richard walked over to her and, for the first time, really looked at her. Beneath the simple uniform and grey hair tied in a modest bun, there was a posture that didn't match someone who spent her days cleaning up after others. There was dignity and knowledge in those eyes. "Please, I need to know. I have a crucial meeting tomorrow with Chinese investors, and I just lost my interpreter. Could you help me?" Catherine hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cleaning cloth. "Sir, I'm just the cleaner." "And you also speak fluent Chinese. How? Why?" A deep sigh escaped the woman's lips. "I was a professor of East Asian languages at Columbia for nearly 20 years, she finally revealed, lifting her chin slightly. "Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese, and Korean." Richard blinked several times, trying to process the information. "And now you're cleaning my office? What happened?" "Life happened, Mr. Anderson," she shrugged, a gesture heavy with many defeats. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish my shift. I still have 3 floors left." "Wait," Richard gently took her arm. "I need your help. I can pay well, far more than you earn as a cleaner. Please be my interpreter tomorrow." Catherine's eyes sparkled for a moment, but quickly dimmed. "I don't think it's appropriate, sir. Your clients wouldn't take a cleaner seriously. They don't need to know." The words left Richard's mouth before he could think. "You could dress appropriately and be introduced as our international relations consultant. It's just one meeting." The proposal hung in the air between them. For Richard, it was a desperate solution to an urgent problem. For Catherine, it represented something she didn't dare name. "May I think about it?" she finally asked. "Of course, but I'd need an answer today. The meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. Catherine nodded and continued her work, while Richard returned to his desk, unable to focus on the documents in front of him. That cleaning woman had just become his last hope. Hours later, when the building was nearly empty, Catherine timidly knocked on Richard's office door. He looked up, the dark circles under his eyes betraying the weight of the crisis he faced. "I accept, Mr. Anderson," she said simply, "but I have conditions." He motioned for her to come in and sit, something he had never done before. "I'm listening." I want to be treated with respect throughout the process. I don't want to lie about who I am. We just won't mention my current role at the company, and I want to be fairly compensated for my knowledge, not my discretion." Richard felt the corner of his mouth lift in an involuntary smile. The posture, the vocabulary, the firm tone. This was definitely not the same person who quietly cleaned his office every morning. "Fair enough," he said, extending his hand. $1,000 for tomorrow's meeting, and we can discuss a more permanent arrangement depending on the outcome. 3,000, Catherine countered without hesitation. "And I'll need an advance to buy appropriate clothes. Mine aren't suitable for occasions like this anymore." The businessman blinked, surprised by the firm negotiation, but nodded. "Deal." He reached for his checkbook. "Should I send my driver to pick you up tomorrow?" "That won't be necessary. I'll be here at 9 a.m. As he filled out the check, Richard couldn't help but wonder what kind of story lay behind this woman. How had a respected academic ended up as a cleaner in his company? What had happened? The next day, when the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Richard barely recognized the woman who stepped out. Catherine wore a sober yet elegant navy blue pantsuit with a white silk blouse. Her still gray hair was styled in an elaborate bun, and subtle makeup accentuated her bright, intelligent eyes. The transformation was so complete that several employees did double takes trying to place who this unfamiliar executive was. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she greeted formally, extending her hand. "Mrs. Parker," he stammered, shaking it. "You look presentable," she finished with a soft smile. "It was the least I could do, considering the importance of this meeting." They entered the conference room together, where Victoria Reynolds, the company's CFO, was organizing some documents. She looked up, casting a questioning glance at Richard. "Victoria, this is Catherine Parker, our consultant for this negotiation," Richard introduced, noticing the sharp look his CFO gave the newcomer. "Consultant," Victoria repeated, adjusting her expensive frames. "I wasn't informed we'd have an external consultant. It was a last-minute decision," Richard explained quickly. "Mrs. Parker has extensive experience with international negotiations, especially in the Chinese market." Victoria pressed her lips in disapproval, but said nothing more. At 45, she was known for her ruthless competence and ambition she made no effort to hide. As Richard's right-hand woman for over 10 years, I was accustomed to having the final say in any major company decision. "Are the documents ready?" Richard asked, trying to ease the tension. "Yes, but I have reservations about some clauses the Chinese insist on including," replied Victoria, deliberately ignoring Catherine's presence. "I think we're conceding too much." "May I?" Catherine extended her hand politely for the papers. After a confirming glance from Richard, Victoria reluctantly handed them over. Catherine adjusted her reading glasses and began carefully examining the documents, occasionally flipping to the pages in Chinese. "Interesting," she murmured after a few minutes. "What is it?" Richard asked anxiously. "Some clause translations aren't accurate," Catherine explained calmly. "For example, here where it says investment proportional to net assets, the Chinese version reads closer to investment proportional to declared assets. It's a subtle but legally significant difference." Victoria snatched the papers from Catherine's hands. "Impossible. We hired a specialized firm for this translation." "And yet discrepancies exist," Catherine replied, unshaken. "I can point out 5 more just on this page." Richard felt a chill down his spine. Without this unlikely intervention, he might have signed an agreement with major contractual pitfalls. "Victoria, please let Mrs. Parker conduct a full review before the Chinese delegation arrives." The CFO clenched her fists but handed the documents back. The tension between the two women was palpable. "I'll check if everything's ready at reception," Victoria said coldly before leaving the room. Richard watched Catherine work with meticulous attention to detail, making precise notes in elegant handwriting that clearly didn't belong to a mere cleaner. "Where did you learn Chinese?" he asked, genuinely curious. Catherine paused, as if deciding how much of her story to share. "I was born in Portland," she began, surprising Richard with a northern origin her accent no longer revealed. My father was a merchant who did business with Japanese and Chinese immigrants in the area. From a young age, I had a knack for languages and would help with translations at the store counter. At 18, I earned a scholarship to study literature, specializing in East Asian languages. I did my master's in the US and my doctorate in Taiwan. And how did you end up? Richard hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question without being rude. As a cleaner, she finished with a resigned smile. It's a long story, Mr. Anderson, perhaps for another day. The Chinese delegation will arrive in 20 minutes, and we need to be prepared. Before Richard could press further, the phone rang. Reception informed him the Chinese delegation had arrived early and was already on their way up. Panic rose. They weren't fully prepared, the documents weren't fully reviewed, the strategies weren't aligned. Don't worry, Catherine's calm voice surprised him. They arrived early on purpose. It's a negotiation tactic to unsettle us. Let's greet them calmly. Offer tea, not coffee, tea, and start with light conversation about their trip, the weather in New York. Ask about their families. Only then will we discuss business. Richard nodded, impressed by the confidence of this woman he'd barely noticed in the halls until yesterday. When the Chinese delegation entered, 5 middle-aged men in impeccable suits, Catherine naturally assumed the role of hostess, greeting them in fluent Mandarin with proper bows and cultural details that clearly pleased them. The oldest among them, Yang Liu, seemed especially impressed, responding with a genuine smile that Richard Anderson had never managed to elicit in months of negotiations via video conference. The meeting unfolded in a surprisingly pleasant manner. Catherine Parker didn't just translate. She softened Richard's more direct remarks, added cultural context when needed, and occasionally made insightful observations that helped move the negotiation forward. For all intents and purposes, she seemed like an experienced diplomat, not someone who hours earlier had been scrubbing the floor they now walked on. Victoria Reynolds, however, watched everything with growing irritation. Every time the Chinese delegates directed a question straight to Catherine, completely ignoring her, her face twisted into a poorly disguised expression of displeasure. During a lunch break, when the Chinese guests were taken to the restaurant, on the ground floor by one of the assistants, Victoria confronted Richard in the hallway. "Who is this woman, really?" she demanded. "Where did you find her?" "I already explained she's a consultant specializing in—" "Cut the act, Richard," Victoria snapped, her voice low but intense. "I know all your connections. In the market. This woman came out of nowhere. What does she want? How much is she charging? Victoria, now is not the time. We're about to close a deal that could save the company, or sink it for good. You handed confidential information to a complete stranger." "I trust her judgment," Richard replied firmly, "and I suggest you do the same, for the good of the company." Victoria adjusted her blazer, trying to regain her composure. "You're making a mistake. I hope you realize it before it's too late." With those words, she turned on her heel and walked back into the meeting room, where Catherine was calmly reviewing her notes. The business lunch continued in the same positive tone as the morning. Richard watched fascinated as Catherine gracefully navigated between business topics and cultural references that clearly delighted their visitors. At one point, she even recited an ancient Chinese poem, prompting Yang Liu to applaud in genuine appreciation. "Your consultant is extraordinary," Yang remarked to Richard in English. "Where did you find someone so well-versed in our culture?" Before Richard could fabricate an answer, Catherine intervened in flawless English. "Mr. Anderson has a talent for gathering skilled people. His company is known for valuing knowledge, not just titles." The Chinese businessman nodded, satisfied with the diplomatic response, while Richard shot a grateful glance at his unlikely savior. When the contracts were finally signed late in the afternoon, Richard's relief was palpable. The Chinese had agreed to terms far more favorable than expected, and much of that was due to Catherine's skill in mediating the negotiations. "Thank you," Yang Liu said in English, shaking Catherine's hand before leaving. "It was a pleasure negotiating with someone who understands our language as well as our heart." After the delegation had gone, Richard closed the meeting room door and collapsed into a chair, exhausted but beaming. "Mrs. Parker, you just saved my company," he declared, looking at her with admiration. "I don't know how to thank you." Paying what we agreed on will be enough, she replied, gathering her notes. No, it won't. Richard stood up. I want to offer you something more. A permanent position. We need someone with your knowledge and skills. Catherine stared at him, surprised. Mr. Anderson, until yesterday, I was just the cleaning lady you barely noticed in the hallways. And today you proved you're so much more than that. Please at least consider the offer. At that moment, Victoria walked into the room, interrupting the conversation. The final documents have already been sent to the legal department, she informed coldly. We need to discuss the next steps, Richard, in private. Of course, agreed Catherine, picking up on the cue. Should I return tomorrow to discuss your proposal, Mr. Anderson? Yes, please. At 10 a.m., I'll be here, she promised, leaving the room with the same dignity she had maintained throughout the meeting. As soon as the door closed, Victoria turned to Richard. You can't seriously be considering giving her a position. Why not? She just secured a deal none of us could have managed. Richard, we know nothing about this woman, Victoria exclaimed, losing her composure. Where she came from, why she was working as a cleaner if she has all these qualifications. There's something off about this whole story. Richard sighed, too tired to argue. We'll talk about this tomorrow. For now, let's celebrate that the company is safe. For now, Victoria murmured before leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. In the modest apartment she lived in the Queen's neighborhood, Catherine carefully stored the suit she had worn that day. How long had it been since she last wore clothes like that? 5 years? 6? The expensive fabric seemed to belong to another life, one she had been forced to abandon. She sat at the small kitchen table and opened a carved wooden box, pulling out some old documents. Her diploma from Columbia, certificates of merit, a yellowed photo of her smiling alongside academic colleagues at an international conference in Beijing. Memories of a life that felt like it had happened to someone else. The phone rang, interrupting her trip to the past. Hello, she answered. Mom, it's me, Melissa. Catherine closed her eyes, her heart tightening at the sound of her daughter's voice. Hello, sweetheart, are you okay? Is Emma all right? We're fine, Melissa replied, her voice distant as usual. I just called to let you know I'll need to leave Emma with you on Saturday. Something came up. Of course, no problem. I love spending time with my granddaughter. Thanks, I'll drop her off at 9 a.m. After hanging up, Catherine looked at the check Richard had given her. $3,000, and with that money, she could buy the asthma medication her granddaughter needed and still have enough to pay some overdue bills. Maybe, if she accepted the permanent job offer, she could finally move out of that cramped apartment and give Emma a better life. But what if they discovered her past? What if they found out why she had vanished from academia, why no university would take her back? The weight of shame still crushed her, even after all these years. With a tired sigh, Catherine put the documents back in the box. Tomorrow would be another day, and she needed to be prepared for whatever decision she made. The next morning, arriving at the Anderson Enterprises building, Catherine hesitated at the entrance. She was wearing her navy blue suit again, but felt out of place, as if she were wearing a costume. Part of her wanted to just slip in through the back, put on her cleaning uniform, and return to the invisibility that had protected her for so long. Mrs. Parker, Richard's voice called from the lobby. He walked toward her with a genuine smile. I was waiting for you. Shall we go up? In the elevator, Richard seemed unusually nervous. Did something happen? She asked, concerned. Nothing major, he deflected. Just some developments after you left yesterday. When the elevator doors opened, Catherine immediately sensed something was wrong. The executive floor was strangely quiet, and Richard led her not to his office but to a smaller, more private meeting room. Inside were Victoria and an older man Catherine didn't recognize. Mrs. Parker, this is William Anderson, my father and founder of the company, Richard introduced formally. The white-haired gentleman rose with some difficulty, leaning on a cane. So this is the woman who saved our family's legacy, he asked, studying Catherine with sharp eyes that mirrored his son's. I only assisted in a negotiation, sir, she replied modestly. Assisted, William laughed. According to my son, you practically led the entire process. Please have a seat. Catherine obeyed, feeling Victoria's icy gaze on her. We did some research on you last night, William continued, getting straight to the point. Catherine Parker, PhD in linguistics, former tenured professor at Columbia, author of 3 books on Eastern languages, decorated by the Chinese government for her contributions to cultural relations between our countries. Catherine swallowed hard, keeping her expression neutral. That's correct. And then 6 years ago you simply vanished from academia. No explanations, no goodbyes, just disappeared. William leaned slightly forward. Why? Father, I don't think that's relevant to— It's absolutely relevant, Richard, William cut in. If we're offering a position of trust, we need to know who we're dealing with. Catherine clasped her hands in her lap, struggling to maintain her composure. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. You're right, she finally said. You deserve to know. 6 years ago, my husband, Robert, whom I'd been married to for over 25 years, fled the country with all our savings, leaving me with a massive debt. The silence in the room was palpable. Even Victoria seemed surprised by the revelation. Robert was a university administrator. He used my reputation, my name, to embezzle research funds. When the scheme was about to be uncovered, he disappeared, leaving me to face the consequences. Were you accused? Richard asked, horrified. Formally, no. There was no evidence against me, and many colleagues testified on my behalf. But suspicion lingered. My reputation was tarnished. I resigned to spare the institution further embarrassment. And no one helped you? Friends? Family? Richard pressed. Catherine's smile turned bitter. When you fall from grace, Mr. Anderson, it's astonishing. How quickly friends vanish. As for family, I only have my daughter, Melissa, who was pregnant at the time and going through a difficult divorce. I couldn't burden her with my problems too. William studied Catherine with an unreadable expression. And how did you end up as a cleaner here? I sold what I could to pay off some of the debts, but it wasn't enough. With my reputation ruined, no university would take me. I tried tutoring, translations, but clients dried up when they heard about the scandal. Eventually, I took whatever work came my way. She took a deep breath. A 60-year-old woman doesn't have many job options, especially one with a stain on her record. Richard looked genuinely moved. Did you ever try to clear your name? At what cost? Catherine replied. My focus was surviving, helping my daughter, making sure my granddaughter had the bare necessities. Pride doesn't fill your stomach, Mr. Anderson. A heavy silence fell over the room. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Richard seemed to process everything he'd heard. William, however, kept his eyes fixed on Catherine, as if weighing every word, every expression. Well, that explains a lot, the patriarch said at last, including why you were so familiar with contract clauses and negotiations. It wasn't just the language, it was the experience. I've accompanied my husband to many international negotiations over the years, confirmed Catherine. I learned by observing. And now, asked Richard, uncertain, the job offer still stands if you'd like. Victoria cleared her throat, speaking up for the first time. We need to consider the risks to the company's reputation. If the press finds out. Finds out what exactly? Interrupted William. Surprising. Everyone. That we hired a brilliant academic who was the victim of a scam. That we gave a second chance to someone who clearly deserves it. I see that as a great story for the press, don't you, Victoria? The CFO paled, not expecting this reaction from the man always known for his business caution. Mrs. Parker, William continued, turning to her, I'd like to offer you the position of Director of International Relations at Anderson Enterprises, with a special focus on the Asian market. The starting salary would be $15,000 monthly, with benefits and a share in the profits from the deals you lead. Catherine's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed unable to respond. That's a very generous offer, Mr. Anderson. It's a fair offer for someone with your qualifications, he countered. And I should add, it's also a way to make up for the time we shamefully underutilized you. Richard smiled, clearly pleased with his father's decision. Victoria, on the other hand, looked as if she'd swallowed something bitter. I need some time to think, Catherine requested, still processing the turn her life had taken. "It's an important decision." "Of course," William agreed. "How about giving us your answer on Monday? That'll give you the weekend to consider." "Thank you, I will." When Catherine left the room, Richard walked her to the elevator. "I sincerely hope you accept, Mrs. Parker. It's not just for the company. I think you deserve this second chance." She nodded, too emotional to respond properly, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she thought about how life could change completely in just 48 hours. From an invisible cleaning lady to a potential director, all because she answered a phone call. Back at the apartment, Catherine was so distracted she almost missed the message on the answering machine. She pressed play as she took off her shoes. "Mr. Anderson, this is Min Jiang from the Chinese delegation." The voice spoke in heavily accented English. "We'd like to express our concern about last-minute changes to the contract. Our lawyers have identified significant discrepancies between what was discussed and the final document. Please contact us as soon as possible." Catherine frowned, confused. There had been no discrepancies in the documents when she reviewed them. Had something been altered after she left? Her instinct told her to ignore it, not to get more involved than she already was. After all, technically, she was still just a cleaning lady. But part of her, the professor, the professional buried under years of humiliation, couldn't stay quiet in the face of a possible mistake, or worse, deliberate manipulation. She picked up the phone and dialed the number Richard had given her. "Mr. Anderson, it's me, Catherine. We need to talk about the contract with the Chinese. Something's wrong." The next day, a typically cloudy winter Saturday in New York City, Catherine sat on her small living room sofa, watching her granddaughter Emma play on the rug. The 6-year-old, with curly hair and lively eyes, chatted animatedly with her dolls, creating elaborate stories that made her grandmother smile. "Grandma, are you listening to me?" Emma asked, noticing Catherine's distraction. "Of course I am, sweetheart. Your doll was saying she wants to travel to China, wasn't she?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, because she wants to learn to talk like you do, that funny language." Catherine smiled tenderly, pulling her granddaughter onto her lap. "It's called Mandarin, Emma, and if you want, I can teach you someday." "Really?" The little girl's eyes sparkled. "Then I'll be able to talk to the dragons." Before Catherine could explain that dragons didn't speak Mandarin or any other language, the doorbell rang. She frowned, confused. She wasn't expecting visitors, and Melissa wouldn't come to pick up Emma until evening. When she opened the door, she found Richard Anderson standing in the hallway, looking out of place in the modest surroundings of the building. "Mr. Richard," she exclaimed, surprised. "How did you know where I live?" "Sorry for showing up unannounced," he said, genuinely embarrassed. "Your address was in the employee records. Can we talk?" Catherine hesitated for a moment, acutely aware of the stark contrast between her small apartment and Richard's luxurious world. "Grandma, who is it?" Emma's voice piped up behind her. "It's a friend from work, sweetheart," Catherine replied, opening the door wider. "Come in, Mr. Richard. Forgive the simplicity." The businessman stepped inside, glancing around curiously. Despite the limited space, the apartment was impeccably clean and organized, with shelves full of books in various languages and a few carefully framed family photos. "This is my granddaughter, Emma," Catherine introduced. "Emma, this is Mr. Richard. He is my boss." "Are you the owner of Grandma's broom?" Emma asked innocently, making Richard choke. "Emma!" Catherine scolded, flustered. "Why don't you go play in your room while I talk with Mr. Richard?" The little girl shrugged and skipped away, carrying her dolls. "Sorry about that," Catherine said, offering the only armchair in the living room to Richard. "She has no filter." "Don't worry," he smiled, sitting down. "She's adorable." Catherine settled on the couch, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "So you came to talk about the contract?" "Yes," Richard's expression turned serious. "I personally checked with the legal department. You were right. There were changes to the final documents after our joint review." "Who could have done that?" Richard hesitated before answering. "Victoria had access to the documents before they were sent. I confronted her this morning and she confessed." Catherine's eyes widened. "Why? That could have ruined the entire deal." That was exactly the point. Richard ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled. She's been secretly negotiating my removal as chairman with some board members. If the deal with the Chinese fell through, it would have been the final blow to push me out. But that would hurt the whole company. Apparently, there's a group interested in acquiring Anderson Enterprises for well below market value. Victoria would get a hefty commission for facilitating the transaction. Catherine shook her head in disbelief. What now? Now. Richard took a deep breath. I need your help more than ever. The Chinese want an emergency meeting on Monday. If we don't clear this up, the deal will be cancelled and the company won't survive. Silence hung between them for a moment. From the bedroom door, Emma peeked, curiously, not understanding the gravity of the conversation. I'll help, Catherine decided finally, but on one condition. What? I want total transparency from now on. If I'm stepping back into this corporate world, I need to know exactly where I stand. Richard extended his hand. You have my word. And what about my father's offer? I accept the position, she replied firmly, but I'll start officially after we resolve this crisis. When Richard left, Catherine remained seated, contemplating the twists and turns of her life. It was as if the universe was offering her a second chance, an opportunity to rebuild everything she had lost. But was she ready for the new challenges and traps that would surely come? The Monday morning arrived with a light rain that blurred the windows of Richard's office. Catherine, now wearing an elegant grey suit, carefully reviewed the corrected documents while waiting for the arrival of the Chinese delegation. Is everything in order? Richard asked as he entered the room with 2 cups of coffee. Yes, the corrections are accurate, she confirmed, but convincing the Chinese it was just a translation error won't be easy. They're extremely wary in negotiations. Richard nodded, handing her one of the cups. About Victoria, he began hesitantly. We don't need to talk about that now, Catherine interrupted. What matters is saving the deal. At that moment, the door opened and William Anderson entered, leaning on his cane. He looked tired but determined. Good morning, he greeted. Our visitors have just arrived at the building. Father, you didn't need to come. Your health? Nonsense, William cut in. This company is my legacy. If we're in crisis, it's my duty to be here. Catherine watched the interaction between father and son with interest. There was a complex dynamic there that she didn't yet fully understand. A few minutes later, the Chinese delegation entered the room. Yang Liu, the leader, wore a stern expression, a stark contrast to the cordiality of their first meeting. Good morning, Catherine greeted in Mandarin, offering the appropriate bow. We appreciate you honoring our request for this meeting. Respect and courtesy are important, Yang replied seriously. But trust is fundamental in business. We feel it has been broken. Catherine nodded gravely. I understand your concern, and that's why we're here today. There was indeed a change in the documents after our meeting, but it was not intentional, on the part of the Anderson family. For nearly 2 hours, Catherine led a delicate negotiation, explaining the discrepancies, presenting the corrected documents, and eventually revealing the truth about internal sabotage without naming names. Richard and William contributed when needed, but it was clear the Chinese delegation trusted Catherine's mediation above all. Do you swear on the honor of your ancestors that there will be no more surprises? Yang Liu finally asked after a lengthy whispered consultation with his colleagues. I swear, Catherine replied solemnly. And starting today, I will personally oversee every aspect of this agreement as Director of International Relations for Anderson Enterprises. A murmur of approval spread through the Chinese delegation. Yang Liu smiled for the first time that day. Then we accept the corrections. The agreement remains valid. When the Chinese delegation left, Richard, William, and Catherine exchanged relieved glances. You are extraordinary, Mrs. Parker, William declared. In nearly 50 years of business, I've never seen someone turn around such a delicate situation with such skill. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, she replied modestly. I only did my job. And what about Victoria? Richard asked, returning to the delicate subject. I've already asked her to clear out her office, William said firmly. I won't tolerate betrayal, no matter how long someone has worked for us. Catherine remained silent, aware that her own rise had come from another's fall. It was a bittersweet feeling. In the weeks that followed, Catherine immersed herself in her new role with the dedication and meticulousness that had always defined her academic work. Her office, previously occupied by Victoria, had gradually transformed into a space that reflected her personality. Books in various languages, some souvenirs from her academic travels, and a photo of Emma smiling in a simple frame. The transition from cleaner to executive had, as expected, sparked much curiosity and some resentment among the staff. Some avoided her, uncomfortable with the drastic change in status. Others, especially those who had always treated her with respect even when she cleaned the bathrooms, now seemed genuinely happy for her success. One afternoon, as she reviewed documents for a new negotiation, Catherine received an unexpected visit. Melissa, her daughter, appeared at the office door. "Mom," she called hesitantly, "can I come in?" Catherine stood up, surprised and emotional. Her conversations with her daughter in recent years had been brief and practical, usually only about Emma. "Melissa, of course, come in," she invited, gesturing to a chair. The 32-year-old woman entered timidly, looking around with evident admiration. "Emma wouldn't stop talking about Grandma's new job, but I admit I didn't fully believe it," she confessed as she sat down. "It's impressive." "It was all very unexpected," Catherine replied, sitting back down. "How did you know where to find me?" "I called your old department wanting to leave a message, and they told me you were now a director. I had to ask them to repeat it twice." An awkward silence fell between mother and daughter. There were so many unspoken things, so many years of emotional distance. "Melissa, I came to apologize, Mom," the young woman interrupted, surprising Catherine. "D'Artung, sir, for all these years, for not being by your side when everything fell apart." Catherine felt a lump in her throat. "You were pregnant, going through your own divorce. I should have been supporting you. But instead, you gave up everything to help us." Melissa's eyes were now filled with tears. "Only now am I starting to understand the magnitude of your sacrifice." "It wasn't a sacrifice, dear. It was a choice, one I'd make again without a second thought." Melissa stood up and, in a gesture that hadn't happened in years, hugged her mother. "Emma asked me to invite you to dinner at our place tonight. She wants you to teach her some words in Mandarin to impress her classmates at school." Catherine laughed, discreetly wiping away a tear. "It would be my pleasure." When Melissa left, Catherine sat down again, overcome by an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not just for her professional future, but for the possibility of rebuilding her relationship with her daughter. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Richard. "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Parker. I was passing by and saw you had a visitor." "My daughter Melissa," she explained with a smile. "She came to invite me to dinner." Richard smiled, genuinely happy for her. "That's wonderful. Family is important." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Actually, I came to invite you to dinner as well, but this one's business. Friday, with potential Japanese investors. My father insisted you be there." "I'll definitely be there," Catherine confirmed. "By the way, if I may suggest, we should consider hiring a permanent Japanese interpreter. I can handle initial negotiations, but for long-term relationships, we'll need someone dedicated." "Excellent idea. Do you have any recommendations?" Catherine thought for a moment, recalling her former students. "I have a few names in mind, yes, former students who stood out." "Perfect," Richard said, looking satisfied. "Oh, and HR reminded me that you still need to update some documents for your contract formalization. I'll take care of that today." When Richard left, Catherine returned to the documents on her desk, but her mind wandered. In just a few days, her life had completely changed. From an invisible janitor to a respected executive, from a distant mother to a present grandmother, from a victim of circumstances to the protagonist of her own destiny. She looked at the old Columbia badge now kept on her desk, a symbol of her. Past she no longer had to hide. The road ahead would certainly have challenges, adapting to the corporate world, rebuilding family relationships, perhaps even facing the consequences of her past when they inevitably came to light. But for the first time in 6 years, Catherine felt she was finally regaining control of her story. And all because, in an unexpected impulse, she answered a phone call in Mandarin. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 3 months had passed since Catherine officially took on the role of Director of International Relations at Anderson Enterprises. The New York City autumn painted the trees along Fifth Avenue in golden hues, visible from the wide windows of her office on the 30th floor. It was hard to believe that not long ago she had been cleaning those very windows, invisible to the executives who now treated her as an equal. Ms. Parker, called Jennifer, her assistant, from the door. Mr. Tanaka has just arrived for the meeting. Thank you, Jennifer. Take him to the conference room and offer green tea. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Catherine quickly checked her appearance in her compact mirror. Her hair, once always tied in a severe bun, now sported a modern cut that highlighted her graying strands. The impeccable navy blue suit had been bought at one of the most elegant stores on Fifth Avenue, paid for with her first salary as director. Entering the conference room, she greeted the Japanese businessman with a precise bow. Tanaka-san, yoroshiku onegai shimasu. The man smiled, clearly impressed by her grasp of Japanese etiquette. Parker-san, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Yang Liu spoke very highly of you. The meeting went smoothly, like all the ones Catherine had led since taking the position. Her language skills were only part of what made her valuable to the company. Years of academic experience had given her a deep understanding of different cultures and negotiation protocols that now proved invaluable. By the end of the day, as she tidied her desk to leave, Richard lightly tapped on her open door. May I come in? Of course, Mr. Anderson. He laughed, shaking his head. I've asked you to just call me Richard. After all, we're colleagues. Now, old habits are hard to break. She smiled. Can I help with something? Actually, I came to invite you to dinner. He seemed slightly nervous. It's not a business dinner, just dinner. Catherine looked at him, surprised. Over the past few months, her relationship with Richard had evolved from boss and employee to colleagues, and eventually something close to friendship. They often had lunch together to discuss business strategies, and sometimes the conversation continued long after professional matters were exhausted, but a dinner explicitly non-professional was something new. That's very kind of you, she replied, choosing her words carefully, but I'm not sure it would be appropriate. Richard sighed, clearly disappointed, but nodded understandingly. I get your concern. People might talk. It's not just that. Catherine hesitated, searching for the best way to express her thoughts. It's that our lives are so different, Richard. You're 48, I'm 60. You grew up in a world of privilege. I had to fight for every achievement. And now I'm finally rebuilding my career, my relationship with my daughter. And do you believe a simple dinner would put all that at risk? The question hung in the air between them. Catherine realized part of her hesitation came not just from fear of others' judgment, but from her own fear of opening up again, of trusting after having been so deeply betrayed. Maybe not, she finally admitted, but it would be a significant step. A step we can take slowly, Richard suggested, his tone gentle. Just dinner, Catherine. 2 adults talking outside of work. Nothing more, nothing less. She studied him, for a moment, considering. Over the past few months, Richard had proven very different from the arrogant businessman she had first imagined. He was dedicated, hard-working, genuinely concerned for his employees. And, she had to admit, his company was pleasant. All right, she decided at last, but let's go somewhere discreet, please. Richard's smile brightened his face. I know the perfect place, a small restaurant in Greenwich Village, authentic southern food. Can I pick you up at 8? I'd rather meet you there, she replied, still cautious. As you wish. He wrote the address on a card and handed it to her. See you soon, then. When Richard left, Catherine remained seated, contemplating the card in her hands. At 60, the last thing she expected was to find herself facing the possibility of a romantic encounter, especially with someone like Richard Anderson. That evening, as she got ready for dinner, Catherine found herself more nervous than she had been in years. She tried on and discarded 3 different outfits before settling on a simple yet elegant dress in a deep blue that matched her eyes. Melissa, who had come to drop off Emma for the night, watched her mother with a curious smile. "I've never seen you so nervous for a simple work dinner, Mum." "It's not exactly work," Catherine admitted, applying lipstick lightly. "It's personal." Melissa's eyes widened. "You have a date? With who?" Catherine hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Richard Anderson. Your boss." Melissa seemed genuinely shocked. "Mum, are you sure this is a good idea?" "I'm not sure of anything, sweetheart," Catherine answered honestly, "but I think I deserve to find out." Melissa hugged her mother, surprising her. "You do, just be careful, okay? Rich men can be complicated." "Believe me, I know," Catherine said with a sad smile, the ghost of Robert still lingering between them. "But Richard seems different." "They all do at first," Melissa grimaced. "Sorry, I don't mean to be pessimistic. Go and have fun. Emma." "And I will be here watching cartoons and eating popcorn." The restaurant was exactly as Richard had described, small, cozy, and far from the usual circuit of New York City executives. Specializing in authentic Southern cuisine, it had a rustic, warm atmosphere with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Richard was already waiting when she arrived, standing immediately upon seeing her. His admiring gaze made Catherine blush slightly. "You look beautiful," he said simply, pulling out her chair. "Thank you," she replied, sitting down. "This place is charming. How did you find it?" "My mother showed it to me," he explained, sitting across from her. "She loved authentic Southern food, said it reminded her of her childhood in Charleston." "Your mother was Southern, I didn't know that." "Yes, she met my father when he went to Virginia for a mining project." Richard smiled nostalgically. "She was a grade school teacher in a rural school, daughter of a small farmer. My father always said it was love at first sight." Catherine smiled, realizing she had never thought of Richard as someone with a family history, with roots beyond just wealth and business. "Did she pass away long ago?" 10 years cancer." He replied, a shadow passing over his face. "My father never fully recovered. They had one of those rare marriages, you know, where love only grows with time." "I do know," Catherine answered softly. "I thought I had one of those. I was mistaken." Richard nodded understandingly. "Your ex-husband, Robert, isn't it? What exactly happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Catherine sighed, toying with the wine glass the waiter had just served. "Robert and I met in college. He was in business. I was a professor. He seemed like a good man, smart, charming, dedicated. At least that was the image he projected." She took a small sip of wine before continuing. "After years together, I discovered most of it was a facade. He had been embezzling university funds, using my name and reputation as cover. When the investigations began, he fled abroad with another woman, a former student of mine, I might add, taking all our savings." Richard shook his head, indignant. "And you ended up paying the price." "In more ways than one," she confirmed. "Financially, professionally, emotionally. Melissa, my daughter, never fully recovered from the betrayal. She adored her father and hasn't been able to trust men since." "Like you?" The direct question caught Catherine off guard. "Perhaps," she admitted. "I think we all carry scars one way or another." "True," Richard agreed, his gaze distant for a moment. "I have mine too." The dinner continued with surprisingly easy and pleasant conversation. They discussed literature, music, shared travel stories and experiences. To Catherine's surprise, they discovered many shared interests, despite their age and background differences. "Did you know we were both in Kyoto the same month 15 years ago?" Richard remarked, laughing at the coincidence. "I was there closing a deal with a tech company, and you were attending a linguistics conference. We might have passed each other on the streets and never known." "The universe has its ironies," Catherine replied, smiling. "Maybe it wasn't the right time for us to meet." "And is now?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Catherine felt warmth rise to her cheeks, not just from the wine. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I'm glad we're here now." When dessert arrived, a traditional cheese and jelly with fresh cheese and guava paste. Richard hesitated before asking the question, clearly weighing on him. "Catherine, do you regret taking the position at the company? Having your life turned upside down like this?" She considered the question carefully. "No," she finally replied. "It's been challenging, of course, and sometimes I miss the simplicity of my old routine. But," she smiled, "it's never too late for a fresh start, is it?" Richard smiled back, reaching across the table to lightly brush her fingers. "Never too late," he agreed. The touch was light, almost casual, but sent a shiver down Catherine's spine. How long had it been since she'd felt that kind of connection with someone? Years, maybe decades. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. As they left the restaurant, Richard insisted on calling her a cab despite her protests. "It was a wonderful evening," he said as they waited on the sidewalk. "Could we do it again?" Catherine hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I'd like that." When the cab arrived, Richard opened the door for her, but before she got in, he leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. The gesture, so simple and respectful, moved her deeply. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Richard." On the way home, Catherine felt strangely light, as if a weight she'd carried for years had begun to lift. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was room in her life for more than just work and family. Perhaps there was space for a fresh start in every way. The following Monday, upon arriving at the office, Catherine found a small vase of white orchids on her desk. The card simply read, "For new beginnings, R." She smiled, gently touching the petals, when Jennifer hurried in. "Mrs. Parker, sorry to interrupt, but Mr. William asked for your immediate presence in his office. It seems serious." Catherine's smile faded. In her 3 months at the company, she had rarely been summoned to the patriarch's office, and never urgently. William Anderson sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, looking older and wearier than Catherine remembered. Beside him was Richard, his grave expression immediately setting off alarms in her mind. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted formally. "Is something wrong?" William gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Mrs. Parker. We received some disturbing news this morning." She obeyed, trying to steady her suddenly racing heart. Could it be about the dinner with Richard? Had someone seen them? "We received an anonymous email," William continued, putting on his glasses to read from the computer screen. "It says your ex-husband, Robert Parker, is back in the United States." Catherine felt her blood run cold. Of all possibilities, this was the last thing she expected. "What? He can't be back. There's a warrant for his arrest." "Apparently it was revoked," Richard explained gently. "According to the email, he struck a deal with the authorities, returned some of the embezzled money, and is now free." "But that's impossible." Catherine felt anger rising within her. "He stole millions, ruined my career, my reputation." William said, looking directly at her. "The question is, what does this mean for the company? This email suggests Robert is planning some kind of revenge against you, and by extension, it could affect Anderson Enterprises." Catherine struggled to process the information, her mind spinning. "Who sent this email?" Richard and William exchanged glances. "We don't know for sure," Richard answered carefully, "but IT traced the IP to a company computer." "Someone here?" Catherine was stunned. "Who would do that?" "We have our suspicions," William said gravely. "Victoria didn't take her dismissal well. She's kept in touch with some employees loyal to her." "And you think—" Catherine paused, the reality of the situation finally dawning on her. "You think she's conspiring with my ex-husband against me?" "It's a possibility we can't ignore," Richard confirmed. "If Robert really is back and planning something, we need to be prepared." Catherine suddenly felt exhausted, as if all the years of struggle had crashed down on her shoulders at once. Just as she was starting to rebuild her life, the past had resurfaced to haunt her again. "What do you want me to do?" she finally asked. "For now, nothing different," William replied. "We've hired extra security for the building and alerted reception. If Robert tries to make contact or show up, we'll be notified immediately." "What about the ongoing negotiations?" Catherine asked, concerned. If this leaks, it could hurt our credibility with international partners. That's why we need to be discreet and careful, Richard agreed. But we can't just ignore the threat. William leaned forward, his tired eyes fixed on Catherine. Mrs. Parker, is there anything else we should know about your ex-husband? Anything that might help us understand what he could be planning? She took a deep breath, thinking carefully. What could Robert want after all these years? Revenge. Seemed unlikely. He had never been a man driven by emotions, only by greed. Robert was always motivated by money, she finally replied. If he's back, and if he's somehow connected to Victoria, it's probably because he saw a profit opportunity. Maybe he's trying to sabotage the negotiations with the Asians, Richard suggested. Victoria knows the details of the deals that were underway when she was fired. Possibly, Catherine agreed, but it would be risky for him to expose himself like that after so long in hiding. William sighed heavily, looking even older. We'll keep our eyes open. And, Mrs. Parker, he added, his voice softening, I want you to know you have our full support. Whatever your ex-husband is planning, we won't let him harm you or this company. Catherine nodded, touched by the show of solidarity but still deeply unsettled. As she left the room, she felt Richard's hand lightly touch her shoulder. Are you okay? No, she admitted honestly. But I will be. I've faced Robert once before. I can do it again. Richard looked at her with clear admiration. You're an incredible woman, you know that? Despite the situation, Catherine couldn't help a small smile. Just a survivor, like all of us. Back in her office, Catherine found herself unable to focus. The news of Robert's return had stirred up memories she'd rather keep buried. The day she discovered the embezzlement, the scandal at the university, the nights spent crying alone while Melissa, pregnant and newly divorced, slept in the next room. Picking up the phone, she dialed her daughter's number, suddenly urgent about warning her. Melissa, can we have lunch today? Today's complicated, Mom. I have an important meeting at work. It's about your father, Catherine said, the words slipping out before she could think better of it. He's back in the United States. The silence on the other end was so deep that for a moment, Catherine thought the call had dropped. Melissa. How do you know that? Her daughter finally replied, her voice tense and low. I got the information. Today at work, Catherine explained, worried by the restrained reaction. I thought you should know so you could stay alert. Another long silence. We need to talk, Mum, not at lunch. Come over for dinner tonight, after Emma's asleep. Melissa's tone sent a chill down Catherine's spine. There was something something her daughter wasn't saying. Melissa, what's going on? Tonight, Mom, please. After the call ended, Catherine remained still, staring at the phone. Melissa's behavior was strange, almost as if it wasn't a surprise to her. But that couldn't be. Melissa had been just as deeply hurt by her father's abandonment as she had. The young woman had cut him out of every photo, dropped his last name after the divorce, even chosen a name for Emma that had no connection to his family. No, she must be imagining things. The shock of the news was clouding her judgment. The rest of the day passed in an anxious blur. Catherine tried to focus on immediate tasks, a video call with Chinese partners, reviewing contracts for the new factory in Chicago, but her mind kept circling back to the mysterious email, Robert's possible return, and Melissa's odd reaction. At 6 p.m., when most employees had already left, Catherine was organizing her papers to leave when she noticed Richard standing at her office door. May I come in? Of course, she said with a faint smile, gesturing to the chair across from her. Instead of sitting, Richard closed the door and approached, perching on the edge of her desk. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you all day, he admitted. How are you holding up? Confused, anxious, she answered honestly. I talked to my daughter about Robert. Her reaction was strange. Strange how? Like she already knew. Catherine shook her head. Which is absurd, of course. Melissa cut all ties with her father when he abandoned us. Richard frowned thoughtfully. Sometimes family relationships are more complicated than they seem at first glance. Yes, but not in this case. You don't know Melissa. She swore she'd never speak to her father again, and she's a woman who keeps her promises. Like her mother. Richard smiled softly, reaching out to touch Catherine's face in a surprisingly intimate gesture. Look, I know we've just started, whatever this is between us. But I want you to know I'm here for you, for whatever you need. Catherine felt her heart race at his touch. It was so tempting to lean on someone after so many years of struggling alone. But the shadow of Robert loomed over her, a constant reminder of the dangers of trusting too much. Thank you, she replied simply, gently pulling away. But this is something I need to handle with my family first. Richard nodded, respecting her space. I understand, just be careful, okay? And call me if you need anything. I will, she promised, though she knew she probably wouldn't. In the taxi on the way to Melissa's apartment in Park Slope, Catherine tried to imagine what her daughter might have to say about Robert. Could it be possible she'd actually kept in touch with her father in secret? The idea seemed absurd, a betrayal to them both. Melissa's apartment was modest but comfortable, reflecting her stable career as a history teacher at a private school. When Catherine arrived, Emma was already asleep as promised. Would you like some tea? Melissa offered, tense as she led her mother to the small living room. I'd rather you get straight to the point, Catherine replied, sitting on the couch. What do you know about your father that I don't? Melissa took a deep breath and sat in the opposite chair. He reached out to me about a month ago, she confessed finally. An email from an address I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it as spam, but the subject line said, "Your mother is in danger." Catherine felt as if she'd been punched. And you didn't tell me. I wanted to protect you, Mom. Melissa looked genuinely distressed. You were finally happy. A new job, rebuilding your life. What did the email say? Catherine demanded, her voice trembling. Melissa stood and went to the desk in the corner of the room, pulling out a folder. From it, she handed her mother a few printed pages. Catherine read the email, her hand shaking more with each line. Robert claimed to have discovered that Victoria Reynolds, the former CFO of Anderson Enterprises, was planning retaliation against the company, and specifically against Catherine. He said he had detailed information about the plan obtained through connections he'd made during his years outside the United States. Most shocking, however, was his claim that he had returned to the country specifically to protect Catherine and Melissa from this plan, which he said could destroy what little you've managed to rebuild. This is... Catherine couldn't find the words. I know what you're thinking, Mom, Melissa said, sitting beside her. It's exactly what I thought. It's a trap, manipulation. Classic him. Did you reply? Melissa hesitated before nodding. I did. I told him I didn't believe a word of it, and if he really cared, he would have been there the last 6 years. I told him never to contact me again. And he replied, Yes. Melissa handed her another printed page. This came yesterday. The second email was shorter, more urgent. Robert claimed that Victoria had hired someone to hack into Anderson Enterprises' systems and sabotage the international negotiations led by Catherine. He said he had proof and wanted to meet with both of them to show it. He wants to meet us after everything? Catherine felt her anger rising. The audacity! Exactly what I thought, agreed Melissa. I was going to tell you everything tonight anyway. But when you called saying you knew about him, I got confused. Catherine explained about the anonymous email received at the company, suspecting it came from someone connected to Victoria. It seems he's playing both sides, she concluded bitterly. Typical of Robert. Melissa bit her lip, suddenly, looking younger and more vulnerable. What do we do now, Mom? Catherine looked at the emails again, her mind racing. If there was any truth to Robert's claims, the company could be at risk. But trusting him, after all he'd done, seemed unthinkable. We need to talk to Richard, she finally decided. Show him these emails and the company's security team. If Victoria is really planning something, they need to prepare. What about Dad? Asked Melissa, the word Dad sounding strange after so many years. Do we respond? Agree to meet him? Catherine thought for a long moment. No, she replied firmly. Not yet. First, let's see what Anderson Enterprises uncovers. If there's really a threat, we'll handle it through the proper channels. Robert is the last person we should trust." Melissa nodded, seeming relieved. "I agree. And, Mom," she hesitated. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I just wanted to protect you." Catherine hugged her daughter, feeling the weight of years of distance finally beginning to fade. "I know, sweetheart. It's what we've always tried to do for each other, isn't it? Protect each other, even when it means keeping secrets." "No more," Melissa promised, tightening the hug. "From now on, no more secrets." The next morning, Catherine arrived early at the office, Robert's emails safely stored in her folder. She'd slept poorly, haunted by nightmares of her ex-husband and Victoria conspiring against her. Richard was already there, unusual for someone who normally arrived after 9. "I need to talk to you," she said without preamble, entering his office. "It's about Robert." She explained about the emails sent to Melissa showing the printed copies. Richard read them carefully, his expression gradually darkening. "This aligns with the information we've received," he said. "Finally, and adds a troubling new element. If Robert is right, Victoria may have hired a hacker." "If he's right," Catherine emphasized. "Robert is a skilled liar, Richard. He could be making all this up to worm his way back into our lives, or to distract us from something he's planning himself." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "I agree we should be cautious, but we can't ignore the possibility there's some truth here. So I'll have IT tighten our system security, and legal prepare a full dossier on Victoria and her activities since she was let go." "What about Robert?" asked Catherine. "If he's really back, let me look into it." Richard picked up the phone. "I have some contacts who can confirm if he's actually entered the country and what his current legal status is." While Richard made calls, Catherine gazed out the window at the New York City skyline, trying to organize her thoughts. After 6 years believing Robert had vanished from her life forever, the possibility of facing him again was both terrifying and strangely freeing. Perhaps, finally, she could confront him for what he had done, get some kind of closure. "Well, this is interesting," said Richard, hanging up the phone after the third call. "Robert Parker really is in the United States. He arrived about 2 months ago, coming from Argentina, and most surprisingly, his legal status is cleared. He made a deal with the Attorney General's office, returned some of the embezzled money, and had his sentence reduced to community service." "How is that possible?" Catherine was stunned. "He stole millions. Apparently, he provided information about larger schemes. He became a sort of informant." Richard seemed equally perplexed. "The deal was confidential, which explains why you weren't informed." Catherine felt her anger rising again. Typical of the system. Protect the powerful, ignore the victims. So he just comes back, as if nothing happened. After what he did. To me, to Melissa. Richard stepped closer, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Unfortunately, it seems so, but that doesn't mean we have to let him back into your lives. Unless, of course, he actually has information that could help us." "You're not suggesting I actually meet with him?" Catherine pulled away, incredulous. "Not alone, certainly." Richard raised his hands in a calming gesture. "But maybe with lawyers present, in a controlled setting. We could find out what he really knows or thinks he knows." Catherine shook her head, still resistant to the idea. "I need to think about this and talk to Melissa. I've asked her not to keep secrets from me anymore. I can't do the same to her." "Fair enough," Richard agreed. "In the meantime, we'll take every possible precaution here at the company." At that moment, Jennifer knocked on the door, looking anxious. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation at reception. A man is insisting on speaking with Mrs. Parker. Says he's her husband." Catherine froze, the blood draining from her face. "Ex-husband," she corrected automatically, her voice barely a whisper. Richard immediately took charge. "Jennifer, tell security to keep him in reception. Don't let him upstairs under any circumstances. And call William, please." After the assistant left, Richard turned to Catherine, who seemed petrified. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to. I can have security escort him out." Catherine took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain composure. No, if he came here, he must have a reason. And if there's any chance he knows something about a threat to the company, she hesitated. But I don't want to see him alone. You won't have to, Richard assured her. I'll be with you the whole time. 20 minutes later, Catherine, Richard, and William Anderson were seated in the main conference room waiting. Catherine tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled slightly under the table. Are you sure you want to do this? William asked gently. No, she admitted, but I have to. When the door finally opened, Catherine felt as if time had stopped. Robert Parker walked in, escorted by security. At 65, he still carried the elegant posture that had always defined him, though his once jet-black hair was now greying at the temples. He wore a well-tailored suit that surely cost more than Catherine made in a month as a cleaner. Catherine. His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep and melodious. You look different. 6 years do that to a person, she replied coldly, especially 6 years cleaning up other people's messes. He had the decency to look embarrassed for a moment before regaining his composure. I understand your anger. I've earned every ounce of it. But I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to warn you. William pointed to the chair across the table. Have a seat, Mr. Parker, and tell us exactly why you're here. Robert sat down, placing a briefcase on the table. First, I should clarify that I'm legally back in the United States. I made a deal. We already know about the deal, Richard cut in sharply. Get to the point. Robert looked at the businessman with clear displeasure, clearly unaccustomed to being interrupted. Very well. Over the past few years, while I was out of the country, I developed a network of contacts in the international financial world. Some of these contacts alerted me to an operation being planned against Anderson Enterprises, specifically targeting the deals with Asian companies. What kind of operation? William asked, leaning forward. Financial sabotage. Robert opened, the briefcase pulling out some documents. Victoria Reynolds didn't act alone when she tried to manipulate the Chinese documents. She has partners, people who want to see this company weakened enough for a hostile takeover. And how do you know this? Catherine questioned, her voice heavy with suspicion. Robert looked directly at her for the first time. Because they contacted me, Catherine. Knowing my history with you, they thought I'd be willing to provide information that could be used against you. Information that could undermine your credibility with the Chinese partners. The silence that followed was thick as fog. Catherine felt her heart pounding so hard she feared everyone in the room could hear it. What kind of information? She finally asked. About our past. About how we ended. Robert seemed genuinely uncomfortable now. They wanted details that could be manipulated, presented in a way to suggest you were involved in the embezzlement, that you knew everything. Catherine felt anger rise again, fierce and hot. And you agreed, is that why you're here? To blackmail me? No! Robert looked genuinely offended. I'm here to warn you. I refused their deal. I told them I had nothing against you, that in fact... He hesitated, glancing at Richard and William before continuing, that I was the only one to blame for everything that happened. Richard and William exchanged skeptical looks. Why should we believe you? Richard asked coldly. For all we know, this could just be another one of your schemes. Robert nodded as if he'd expected that reaction. Fair enough. I can't prove my intentions, but I can prove the threat is real. He slid a flash drive across the table. Here are copies of emails exchanged between Victoria and her associates. They include details about plans to corrupt data in the upcoming negotiations with the Japanese. William picked up the flash drive cautiously. Our IT department will analyze this. If it's authentic. It's authentic, Robert assured him. And there's more. Victoria isn't acting alone. She has a partner inside the company, someone with access to security systems and confidential negotiation details. That's a serious accusation, William noted, his voice grave. Do you have proof? Only hints for now, Robert admitted. But I know someone is leaking privileged information. The messages I intercepted mention an inside contact who remained after Victoria left. Catherine studied her ex-husband carefully, searching for signs of the lies she'd learned to recognize during their years of marriage. But surprisingly, she found none. Robert seemed genuinely concerned. Why would you care? She finally asked. Even if all this is true, why risk your newfound freedom to warn us? Robert sighed deeply, and for a moment he truly looked older, as if the weight of the years and his choices had finally caught up with him. Because I owe it to you. And to Melissa, he replied, his voice low. What I did there. No excuses, but perhaps in some way this can begin to repair a fraction of the damage. William cleared his throat, breaking the moment of emotional tension. We'll analyze this information carefully. If confirmed, we'll take the appropriate measures. In the meantime, he looked at Catherine. What would you like to do about this meeting? All eyes turned to Catherine. She took a deep breath, struggling to organize the whirlwind of emotions consuming her. For now, I want to keep my distance, she finally decided. If the information proves true, we can reconsider. Until then, I'd prefer any communication to go through the company's official channels. Robert nodded, accepting her decision without protest. I understand. He pulled a business card from his pocket and slid it across the table. My current contacts in case you need me. And Catherine. He hesitated before continuing. Is Emma all right? The mention of her granddaughter surprised Catherine. How do you know about Emma? Melissa sent me a photo of her. When I replied to the first email, Robert admitted, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing his face. She's beautiful. She has your eyes. Catherine didn't respond, unable to process the idea that Melissa had shared a photo of Emma with the man who had abandoned them. After Robert left, escorted once again by security, a heavy silence fell over the room. Catherine felt exhausted, as if she had run a marathon. I'll have to talk to Melissa, she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Of course, Richard agreed gently. And in the meantime, we'll verify everything he said. If there really is a traitor in the company. We need to act discreetly, William finished. If we alert this person, we might lose our only chance to uncover the full plan. The following days were tense. The IT department confirmed the authenticity of the emails provided by Robert, revealing an elaborate scheme to manipulate financial data in the upcoming negotiations with the Japanese. However, the identity of the inside contact mentioned remained a mystery. At home, Catherine faced a difficult conversation with Melissa, who confirmed sending a photo of Emma to Robert, but insisted it had been a momentary impulse driven by anger. I wanted him to see what he had lost, she explained, her eyes brimming with tears. I wanted him to know we've moved on, that we're fine without him. I understand the feeling, Catherine replied softly, but we need to be careful, Melissa. We don't know his true intentions. Do you think he's lying about the threat? Catherine hesitated, uncertain. I don't know. The emails seem authentic, but Robert has always been good at manipulating situations to his advantage. Meanwhile, at Anderson Enterprises, a quiet investigation began. William assigned a small, trusted team to monitor internal communications, especially those related to the negotiations with the Japanese. One particularly busy morning, as Catherine reviewed the final details for a video conference with Tokyo, Richard entered her office, quickly closing the door behind him. We've found something, he said without preamble, his voice low. One of the IT technicians identified unauthorized access to the server containing the Japanese negotiation documents. Someone is copying files. Did they find out who? Not for certain. Richard sounded frustrated. The access was made using different employees' credentials. But there's a pattern. All the logins came from terminals in the finance department. Victoria's old department, Catherine concluded, feeling a chill. She must have left allies there. Exactly. The problem is, there are dozens of people. We need to narrow down the suspects. At that moment, Catherine, Parker's phone rang. It was from the reception department. Mrs. Parker, sorry to bother you, but there's a call for you on line 3. It's... The receptionist hesitated. Victoria Reynolds. Catherine and Richard Anderson exchanged stunned glances. I'll take it, she decided, putting the call on speaker so Richard could hear. Catherine Parker, she answered formally. Catherine, Victoria's voice was cold and controlled. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. What do you want, Victoria? Straight to the point, as always. I like that about you. A brief pause. I imagine by now you've discovered the unauthorized access. Your tech team is good, I'll admit. Catherine felt her blood run cold. How could Victoria know about the investigation? I don't know what you're talking about, she replied, trying to buy time. Of course you do, Victoria laughed softly. And your dear Robert must have told you about my supposed evil plans too. Typical of him, always taking the most dramatic route. Catherine signaled for Richard to call the IT team. They needed to trace the call. What do you want, Victoria? She asked directly. I want to offer a deal. You resign from your position, admit to manipulating documents in the Chinese negotiations, and I leave Anderson Enterprises alone. And why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll make sure the media knows how a former professor, involved in an embezzlement scandal, magically landed an executive role. How you really convinced the Chinese, what kind of favors might have been offered. The insinuation was clear and repulsive. That's slander, Catherine replied, anger evident in her voice. And both Richard and William know exactly how I got this position. Oh yes, the young heir and the old patriarch, both charmed by the mysterious woman who speaks Chinese. Very convenient. Richard, who had just returned to the room, was making frantic gestures. The call was being traced. What do you really want, Victoria? Catherine asked, trying to keep her on the line. Money? Revenge? What I want, Catherine, is justice. Victoria's voice shifted, revealing deep bitterness. I worked 15 years at that company, gave my life to it, and I was thrown out like trash, replaced by a janitor who just happens to speak a few languages. You betrayed their trust. You tried to sabotage a crucial deal. I did what was necessary to save the company from itself, Victoria nearly shouted. Richard is weak, sentimental. William is old, losing control. Anderson Enterprises needs strong, visionary leadership. Like yours, Catherine couldn't help the sarcasm. Exactly. Victoria seemed oblivious to the tone. I have partners who share my vision. Together we could transform the company into something much greater. Richard signaled they needed 1 more minute to complete the trace. And what happens? Fair if I refuse your deal? Catherine asked, keeping the conversation going. Then there will be consequences, not just for you, but for your precious family too. Your daughter just got that promotion at school, didn't she? It'd be a shame if certain information about Emma's grandfather came to light. Private schools can be so moralistic. The veiled threat to Melissa and Emma made Catherine's blood boil. You really don't want me as your enemy, Victoria. Her voice was dangerously calm now. I may be in my 60s, I may have spent years cleaning bathrooms, but you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone threatens my family. A tense silence followed the statement. Finally, Victoria responded, You have 24 hours to decide, Catherine. I expect your answer tomorrow, same time. The call ended. Immediately, Richard grabbed his phone. Did you get it? He asked anxiously. The response on the other end of the line made her face light up. Excellent. Keep surveillance, but don't make a move yet. Turning to Catherine, she explained, Victoria is staying at a hotel downtown, and guess who's checked into the same hotel in a suite connected to hers? Michael Thompson, our interim CFO, the man who temporarily replaced Victoria after her dismissal. The traitor, concluded Catherine, the pieces falling into place. He must have provided the credentials for the unauthorized access. And probably much more, agreed Richard. We need to act quickly but carefully. If Victoria really has powerful allies, we need concrete proof, Catherine finished, and I think I know how to get it. That evening in her apartment, Catherine stared at the phone, gathering the courage to make a call she never thought she'd make again. Hello? Robert's voice came after 3 rings. It's me, she replied simply. We need to talk. 40 minutes later, Robert was seated in her modest living room, looking oddly out of place. Victoria reached out to you first, didn't she? Catherine asked directly, skipping the small talk. Robert nodded, unsurprised by her conclusion. Yes, she found me in Argentina about 3 months ago. Offered me a deal. I'd return to the US under her protection in exchange for information that could be used against you. And you accepted? At first, yes, he admitted. It seemed like the perfect chance to come back without facing legal consequences. What changed? Robert hesitated, choosing his words carefully. When I realized her plan didn't just involve you, but potentially Melissa and Emma too. I saw there were limits even to my lack of principles. Catherine studied her ex-husband in silence. After so many years of anger and resentment, it was strange to sit calmly with him, discussing an alliance against a common enemy. Victoria called me today, she finally revealed. She threatened my family if I didn't resign. Typical of her, Robert said, unsurprised. She's more dangerous than she seems, Catherine. She's not acting alone. We know about Michael Thompson. It's not just him. There are others, people with influence in the financial market. They want to take control of Anderson Enterprises, but need to weaken it first. And you know who they are? Some, Robert confirmed. And more importantly, I know how they operate. I can help set a trap for Victoria, make her reveal the whole plan. Catherine took a deep breath, her mind racing. What's in it for you, Robert? What's your angle? He smiled sadly. Always sharp. I get a chance to do something right after. So many wrongs, and he hesitated briefly. Maybe eventually an opportunity to meet my granddaughter, not as a grandfather. I know I've lost that right, but just as someone who cares. The sincerity in his voice caught Catherine off guard. For the first time in years, she saw not just the villain who had ruined her life, but also the man she'd fallen for decades ago. Flawed, selfish, but perhaps finally facing the consequences of his choices. I can't promise anything about Emma, she answered honestly. That will depend on Melissa too, but if you really help us stop Victoria, that's all I ask, a chance to prove I've changed. With a plan beginning to form, Catherine contacted Richard and William. Over the following days, an elaborate trap was set. Robert, acting as a double agent, arranged a meeting with Victoria, claiming to have crucial information about Anderson Enterprises' defenses. The chosen location was a discreet restaurant in Tribeca. Without Victoria knowing, every table around them had agents hired by the Anderson family, and every word would be recorded. On the night of the meeting, Catherine waited anxiously in a parked car at a safe distance along with Richard and William. Through an audio device, they could hear the entire conversation. "Are you sure Robert won't betray us again?" asked Richard, clearly tense. "No," Catherine admitted honestly. "But I believe this time our interests are truly aligned." Inside the restaurant, Robert was seated when Victoria arrived, accompanied by Michael Thompson and a third man Catherine didn't immediately recognize. "My God," William whispered beside her. "It's Edward Sullivan, the CEO of Eagle." "Investments?" Richard asked, surprised. "Exactly, one of our biggest competitors." In the restaurant, introductions were made, and the conversation quickly turned to the main subject. "So, Robert, you mentioned having access to Anderson Enterprises' security systems," Victoria began, getting straight to the point. "How exactly did you manage that?" "Your ex-wife," Robert replied with a smile only Catherine, who knew him so well, could identify as fake. "She still trusts me, believe it or not, thinks I'm helping protect the company." "Unbelievable," Victoria laughed. "After everything you've done." "People see what they want to see," Robert shrugged. "Especially when the alternative is admitting they were foolish." "And what exactly did you find out?" asked Edward Sullivan, his voice deep and authoritative. "I know when and how the data transfer to the Japanese will happen. I know which systems will be used, which security protocols, and most importantly," Robert leaned in conspiratorially, "I know how to make it look like Catherine manipulated the numbers to artificially inflate the company's value." Edward's smile was predatory. "That would be extremely useful. When the manipulation comes to light, the stock will plummet. It'll be the perfect moment for our takeover bid." "And what do you want in return?" asked Victoria, ever practical. "A position in the new structure after the acquisition," Robert replied promptly, "and written guarantees that my involvement in this matter will remain confidential." "That can be arranged," Edward agreed. "But we need more than words, Mr. Parker. We need real access to the systems, already taken care of." Robert pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Here are the login credentials and access routes, everything you need for the operation. Michael Thompson took the flash drive, looking impressed. How did you get this? Let's just say I have more resources than I appear to, Robert replied vaguely. So, do we have a deal? Edward extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Mr. Parker. The future of Anderson Enterprises is about to change drastically. In the car, Catherine, Richard, and William exchanged triumphant glances. The flash drive contained not only fake data, but also a program that would allow the IT team to track any attempt to access the company's systems. It worked, Richard whispered. We have everything recorded, the confessions, the plans, the names. And now? Catherine asked, still tense. Now we wait, William replied calmly. We let them try to access the systems with the fake data, and when they do, we'll have concrete evidence for the authorities. 2 days later, just as planned, Edward Sullivan was arrested while attempting to illegally access Anderson Enterprises systems. Searches of his office revealed documents detailing the hostile takeover plan, implicating Victoria, Michael, and several other executives. The scandal quickly spread through New York City's financial market. At Anderson Enterprises, an air of cautious celebration filled the corridors. The threat had been neutralized, and negotiations with the Japanese could proceed without interference. For Catherine, however, there was still one chapter left to close. One morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual and was surprised to find William already there, looking stronger and more determined than she had seen him in months. Mrs. Parker, I'm glad you're here early, he greeted her. I'd like to talk about the future. They sat in the conference room, where Richard joined them moments later. First of all, William began, I want to express my deepest gratitude for what you've done for this company. Without your intervention, we'd now be in Edward Sullivan's hands. I only did what anyone would have done, Catherine replied modestly. No, you didn't, William corrected gently. You showed extraordinary loyalty and competence, especially considering how we treated you at first. Richard nodded in agreement. That's why we'd like to offer you something more permanent, William continued. You've already proven your worth as Director of International Relations, but we believe you can contribute even more to the company. What do you have in mind? Richard and William exchanged glances. We'd like you to join the board of directors, Richard answered. With an equity stake in the company. Catherine blinked, surprised. That's unexpected, she managed to say. It's well-deserved, William stated firmly. You've saved this company twice. And more importantly, you've brought a perspective we've long been missing. Someone who understands both the factory floor and the boardroom. Catherine felt genuinely moved. This was more than a promotion. It was recognition of the journey she had taken. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Richard smiled. I need to think, she replied honestly. It's an important decision. Of course, William agreed. Take all the time you need. That evening, Catherine reflected on the offer as she prepared dinner in her apartment. Melissa and Emma were coming over to celebrate the little girl's recent 7th birthday. Grandma, Emma exclaimed as she arrived, hugging her enthusiastically. Look what I got at school. She proudly showed off a merit certificate for her performance in English class. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Catherine hugged her granddaughter, beaming with pride. Soon, you'll be speaking as many languages as I do. Is it true you're going to be the boss of the company? Emma asked innocently. Mommy said you'll be in charge of everyone now. Catherine glanced at Melissa, who smiled sheepishly. Richard called me, her daughter explained. He told me about the board invitation. I haven't decided yet, Catherine replied, setting the plates on the table. It's a big responsibility. One you deserve more than anyone, Melissa said, sitting down, her expression softening. Mom, after everything you've been through, everything you've sacrificed for us, don't you think it's time to accept that you deserve good things in life? The question struck Catherine deeply. For so long she had grown accustomed to fighting, surviving, putting others' needs before her own. She had almost forgotten what it was like to want things for herself. Maybe you're right, she admitted, serving the food. But there's something else we need to discuss. Your father, Melissa sighed, as if she had been expecting the topic. He really helped, didn't he? Without him, you wouldn't have been able to catch Victoria. Yes, Catherine confirmed, and he expressed a wish to meet Emma, not as a grandfather, just as a family friend. Melissa fell silent for a long moment, watching her daughter happily eating her dinner, oblivious to the adults' serious conversation. "What do you think?" she finally asked. "I think it's your decision, Melissa. Robert made unforgivable mistakes, but he also helped us when we needed it, and in the end he's her grandfather, a grandfather who was never present." Melissa pointed out, her voice still carrying resentment. "Yes, and nothing will change that." Catherine agreed. "But maybe there's room for something new, something different from what we had before." Melissa nodded slowly. "I'll think about it," she promised. "And what about you and Richard?" She changed the subject with a sly little smile. "Emma told me he sent flowers." Catherine blushed slightly. "It's complicated." "Life usually is," Melissa mused. "But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy it, right?" 2 weeks later, at a formal ceremony at Anderson Enterprises headquarters, Catherine Parker was officially introduced as the newest member of the board of directors. Wearing an elegant pearl grey suit, she looked radiant as she signed the document sealing her new position. In the audience, Melissa and Emma applauded proudly. Beside them, keeping a respectful distance, was Robert, invited by Catherine as acknowledgement for his decisive help against Victoria. His gaze, as he watched his ex-wife assume a role she never dreamed of holding at 60, was a mix of admiration and regret for all he had lost. Richard, standing beside Catherine on stage, couldn't hide the pride and affection he felt for her. When the camera flashes subsided and the formal part of the ceremony ended, he leaned in to whisper in her ear, "Dinner tonight to celebrate." Catherine smiled, feeling strangely young and light. "I'd love that." Later, as she looked out at the illuminated city from the rooftop restaurant where Richard had taken her, Catherine reflected on the incredible journey of the past few months. From an anonymous cleaner to a respected executive, from a lonely woman to someone surrounded by people who valued her. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, noticing her distant gaze. "About how life can change completely because of a simple phone call," she replied, smiling. "If I hadn't answered that call in Mandarin..." Richard took her hand across the table, a gesture that now felt natural between them. "Maybe it was fate," he suggested, half joking. "Or maybe it was just the universe finally recognizing your worth. Or maybe," Catherine added, her eyes shining, "it's just the beginning of a new story." As she raised her glass to toast the future, Catherine knew that no matter what came next, she would face it with the same courage and dignity that had brought her this far. From a woman broken by betrayal to a respected leader, her transformation was complete, and all because on an ordinary day, a cleaner answered a call in Mandarin. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing with end of story. You've just witnessed the rebirth of a woman who went from invisibility to the spotlight. And you? What unexpected calls have changed your life? Share in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe to join more journeys of triumph.